We are the 99%, so say the protesters in the Occupy Wall Street protest movement, which has inspired anti-capitalist tent camps in many Western cities. But how credible is this claim to represent the people in a revolt against corporate greed? My guest today is Vlad Teichberg, a prominent member of the Occupy movement and a co-founder of Global Revolution TV. Winter's coming, the police are moving in. Has the Occupy movement got any real hope of changing the world? Vlad Teichberg in New York City, welcome to HardTalk.
Thank you.
Would you accept that the Occupy movement right now seems to be running out of steam?
Actually, not at all. I mean, obviously, there have been a lot of attacks on the camps, which have caused people who are participating in the movement a lot of problems. All of the stuff was taken, they have no place to stay, they can't organize. But the movement continues in many ways. I mean, for example, yesterday was a huge day of action in the United States. People started taking over houses that were taken into foreclosure, and families started moving back into those houses. And it was a massively organized action across multiple states. And so the movement has a lot of, a lot of bite, so to speak. And right now, these occupations, so to speak, are spreading virally now throughout these states, not on the level of we're taking camps, but people are beginning to take back the houses that were stolen from them by the bank.
But it seems to me you do need a symbolic focus. I mean, Occupy Wall Street is the phrase known around the world, but you're no longer occupying Wall Street or that park very close to Wall Street where you were. And it seems to me numbers generally in most of the camps that remain are tiny now. So this claim that, we are the 99% is beginning to look a bit ridiculous.
Well, I mean, let's look at how that happened. It's not like people packed up and said, we don't, problems are solved, we're going home. You had, jackboots on the ground. You had violent evictions of these camps. Then you had the governments go in and build fences around all of those squares to stop people from having the conversation. Does it mean the conversation is over? Probably not. As we've seen time and time again, violence does not solve these problems. It's just, they can try to bury them. There seems to be a dual standard in Western press. It's when these kinds of protests are suppressed in Russia or in China or in Iran, it's a crime against democracy. When you have this in your backyard, it's a threat to public order.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the suppression of a fair number of different protests in my time, up close and personal, and what I saw, admittedly, on a screen of the way in which the New York encampment was closed down and the way it was closed down in Portland and other American cities as well, didn't look much to me like the sorts of comparisons you're making.
I don't know. Which press were you watching? Were you watching Fox News by chance?
No, I wasn't watching Fox News. I was watching the BBC.
What were you watching?
BBC News.
Were you watching the BBC? You should watch Global Revolution. It'll tell you the truth.
All right, but just would you address my main point, which is that, you began this movement in the late summer and it appeared to be gathering some sort of momentum and people were expressing support for the Occupy movement, but you never actually got mass numbers out on the streets, did you? And when you claim that you are representing the vast majority of the people in a campaign of protest against capitalist greed and corporate greed, it's a bit of a problem when you don't build up mass numbers.
Well, I don't know what you... on the 17th, 2 days after the eviction of Zuccotti Park in New York, there were about 40,000 people that assembled downtown. These are pretty good numbers, considering the weather and so on. So I want to correct you on two things. First of all, the movement did not start in September in New York. This movement has been going on for quite a while. We think in some ways it started in Tahrir in January of this year with the Arab Spring. It jumped upon. It moved to Spain, and you had the M15 revolution in Spain, which was very similar to actually what happened in the United States in September. And if you notice the trajectory of all of these movements as they're kind of hopping from country to country, continent to continent, is that, first of all, there's a few unifying themes in terms of what these movements are fighting for. and these are like actually positive. It's not actually a rebellion against capitalism or against institutions of some sort, just like for the sake of rebellion. It's actually an idea that society should be based on some fundamental humanistic principles, like equality. I mean, it sounds like a radical concept, but that's actually very, very basic human.
Well, never mind sounding like a radical concept. It sounds like a very vague concept, and a lot of people have said, including Andrew Young and others who are, you know, very experienced in civil rights campaigns of their own, they've said that the problem here is that the message you're delivering isn't very clear. It's clear what you're against. You don't like the modern form of US-based and Western-based capitalism, but it isn't actually clear what you want. What are your specific demands and proposals?
Well, the main thing that we wanted, and I think we actually achieved that to a large degree, was when we first went into Zuccotti, was we wanted to start like basically an international conversation about the future of our planet. And when all these other camps sprung up that started doing similar general assembly processes and so on, we basically set up a structure for this public debate about our future. Unfortunately, the powers that be decided that this debate should not continue, and they deployed riot police to stop the conversation from happening. So the conversation is going to move more on the ground. And yes, it does suck that we can't meet in the park and discuss this, but you can't stop this idea from happening. It's something that's spreading like like a tsunami.
All right. Sorry to interrupt, Vlad.
Well,
you can't.
Look,
hang on. You can't have a long-lasting and significant political movement, can you? Just based on the idea that people need to have a conversation.
But there's much more than that. I mean, I'm sorry, but you sound a little ignorant. The reality is that there's certain things that are happening at these camps in terms of the processes that were brought in. The idea of the General Assembly, that every citizen should have an equal voice, and designing structures around that actually allow us to have a consensus-based decision-making process that pushes forward. The idea of a non-hierarchical organization and society which would not have any implicit hierarchy in it. It's maybe an idea whose time has come.
Really?
We are in the middle of...
You think
that's a model? Me. Let me finish.
Is that a... Well, I just...
Well, let me finish. Let me finish, then you can respond.
Well, you made an important point. I just want to know if that's a model that you see being applied to the governance of cities, states, nations. Is that what you believe?
Not necessarily. No one said that. But it's a model for having a discussion about our future. You see, this is the thing. All we wanted to do was have a debate. We didn't go into these camps and start setting up armies to overthrow the government. We didn't. It's a peaceful revolution of citizens. But we do want to have a conversation about the fact that the privileged class is skewing the system, skewing the laws, skewing the rules in such a way that they always have the advantage, and the gap between the richest and the poorest is widening. And as we're having these conversations, and certain things are coming to light, as the population becoming more and more educated, of course the people who are in power are becoming more and more threatened, so now they're dispatching their armed forces to stop the debate.
Would you call yourself a revolutionary?
No, I'm a citizen.
No, I understand that, but I say revolutionary because is what you want to see a revolutionary transformation of the society in which you live? I
want an evolution. You see, revolution is a very vague term. It could mean many things. What I want is evolution. I want to evolve to a society that's much more fair, yes.
Okay. And you made a point in that last answer of stressing time and again that the demonstrations, the protests were entirely peaceful, and you talk about, and I'm using your word, the jackboots that were sent in to dismantle the camps. But it is a problem for you, isn't it, that a lot of people looked at the way the camps were being run, and they looked at the drug use that was evident in some of the camps, they looked at the criminality that was evident in some of the camps, and they thought, well, if this is a model society supposed to be the way human beings can come together and run their lives, it's not very impressive.
Well, I mean, I can't speak, you know, the parks are open. Anyone can come there and do pretty much what they wanted, like what people do in parks. So it's not like there was any kind of control set by the people who organized these protests in terms of what was happening there. It was pretty much the normal laws of divide and pride. I mean, to that I'll answer with a different question. If there was such a problem with drug use or whatnot, why didn't they go in and clear out the drug users? They went in and look at the pictures of who they abused, who they beat up. Look at the pregnant woman who miscarried her baby in Seattle. Was she a drug user? Look at the grandma, 86-year-old grandma that was pepper sprayed in Seattle. Was she also like part of that undesirable element? So it sounds to me, actually, that these excuses of public health or whatnot are just excuses to shut down the debate.
Let's, if we may, just take a step back and look at your backstory for a moment. You spent years inside Wall Street's some of their biggest institutions, big banks working on complex financial products, arguably the sorts of products that eventually brought Wall Street and the banking system to its knees. What was the thing that prompted you to get out?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, getting out. I mean, for many years, I kept working on Wall Street, going in and out of these jobs because they paid very well. But I was funding, actually, specifically the kind of stuff that's really taking hold now, which is a global revolution.
So I'm interested in just the way this worked. I mean, was there ever a time when you actually worked in banking and believed that was an okay thing to do?
Yes. I mean, I think in the mid-90s, when I first went into that business, we were all trying to Kool-Aid that globalization is actually going to be a good thing. It was sold to the population at large as something that would be the ultimate equalizer, economic equalizer across all lands. The reality proved to be quite different. The existence of multinational corporations and their ability to arbitrage different laws versus each other, different jurisdictions, to pollute more, to exploit more, and so on, completely undermined that whole process. So by the end of the 90s, it became apparent that we've been swindled. And that's pretty much where I started turning against the system.
I just wonder, you know, given very few people, I would dare say, in the Occupy movement have the knowledge from the inside of major corporations that you yourself have. I just wonder whether you now believe that all the people who work in the banks, that used to be colleagues of yours even, are in some sense, if not evil, are part of an evil system.
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, I was there, and I could see what was going on pretty clearly. And other people who were intelligent, who were there, could see what was going on pretty clearly, too. So for the people that kind of stayed and were complacent just to get a nice paycheck, they were either, I mean, I think there is a question about their fundamental like, human ethics, because they were not, there was fraud going on all around them, and they never questioned it. And they just because the system was designed such a way that if you did question it, you get punished. So, I mean, they were protecting kind of their own well-being. But so there's a question of, it was a society kind of, or culture that was based on greed and based on, like, you know, selfishness. Take it to the extreme level. So I don't know if I should be condemning the individuals who bought into it or the system itself.
You see, that this is important, isn't it? Because I've looked at a lot of surveys of American public opinion generally, and most Americans, it has to be said, are conservative with a small c, and the vast majority of them embrace capitalism and the market. And your message to your fellow Americans now seems to be, no, that's entirely wrong. Capitalism as it is currently formed and the market as it currently operates run absolutely counter to the interests of ordinary people.
And it's true, because it's not pure capitalism, it's crony capitalism. There's a big difference between the two. It's like the difference between Soviet communism and the communism they wrote about in like the fairy tales they wrote.
Right, so you embrace capitalism, do you?
I don't embrace capitalism, but I definitely observe the fact that the capitalism that it is, as such as it is practiced in modern Western society, is hypocritical.
But would you accept that most Americans actually aspire to get rich, they aspire to be comfortably middle class, and they like a system which, frankly, can allow that to happen?
I think Occupy Wall Street has shown that Americans are waking up. And more of them are waking up every day. They're waking up because they're becoming exposed to some of the information they weren't exposed to before. They're also waking up because they're dealing with the reality that the children have no future, because they're graduating with huge amounts of debt. Their relatives are getting foreclosed on and becoming homeless. This American dream is becoming an American myth. So this contract that you had, that as long as you kind of, stuck your nose to the ground, did your thing, you'll be taken care of, whatever, is breaking down. And it's breaking down not just in the United States, it's breaking down across the world. And it's actually something very important I would like to point out in this case. This revolution, again, is not local to the United States. It's spreading globally. The stuff that's happening in Russia right now, the stuff that's happening in England right now, the stuff that's happening in Egypt, the stuff that's happening in Spain, they're all connected. And if you look at the ideas that all of these people are pushing forward, they're all the same ideas.
Yeah, well, I believe me, I do want to talk more globally in a second. But as you mentioned Spain, it raises a very interesting question, doesn't it? Because Spain has an unemployment rate of over 20%, youth unemployment of over 40%. They've just had a democratic election, and the centre-right, obviously very committed to the market and to the capitalist system as it currently exists, swept a victory, and the leftist socialists were swept out of power. I mean, that seems to be something which we see in, frankly, many of the countries which currently are undergoing economic difficulties. The right is doing well.
And there are a lot of reasons for that. Now, I'll outline for Spain in particular. I mean, I can't speak for every country. I only know what I know. But I do have an idea of what happened in Spain. In Spain, the M15 movement, the revolution movement, if you go back to May of last year, or this past year, it swept all over Spain. And that movement was also the motto was, none of you represent us. I mean, the big problem is that none of these left-wing parties actually represent the people. They are, as we've seen in Greece, as we've seen in the United States, as we've seen even in England for that matter, with the Labour Party, they would be beholden to the banks. I mean, the fact is, with our standard representative systems, where we elect these representatives, have the same problem over and over again. These representatives are constantly get bored. There's no such thing as an honest politician anymore.
So you don't believe in democracy as it currently exists in the West. You simply don't believe in it, which brings me back to this question about whether you're a revolutionary or not. If you don't believe in the system, you don't believe the system can deliver for you, you have to bring it down, don't you?
Just because I'm making an observation that all of these politicians are corrupt, and representative systems lead to the fact that representatives get corrupted over and over and over again, does not make me revolutionary. It just makes me someone who observes a reality.
Well, okay, so let's take the logical extension of that reality. You're saying that Barack Obama, your own president, is nothing more than a puppet, a capitalist tool, are you?
I judge people by their actions. If we look at what Obama has done since he got into office, he bailed out the banks at the expense of the people. He's continued the wars. He's increased the police state. And to some degree, I personally feel that this crackdown on all the camps across the United States had something to do with the federal government. There were these phone calls, you know, they had the conference calls, we're organizing all the cities. Like, it's a cookie-cutter matter. Every single raid on every single occupation is almost identical. And I've been watching them because we're actually broadcasting them on our global channel every single night. So I do think, I'm not exactly saying that, I'm not going to say anything specific about Obama, but if we judge...
Well, I think you've said plenty. I think we've got a clear idea of what you think of President Obama right now. I'm just thinking as you speak of something written by the Pulitzer Prize-winning author David Roeder recently. He said, the Occupy movement, in truth, is light years behind the Tea Party in terms of sparking political change in the United States.
I don't know. It's going to be really hard to compare. The Tea Party was not attacked physically when they were trying at their rallies. So we are operating under different conditions.
Well,
like
yeah,
I said before,
obviously it wasn't attacked in the same way because it wasn't trying to do the same things. The Tea Party wasn't trying to establish tent camps right inside the financial district of Manhattan.
We were not. Here's the thing. We were trying to, like I said before, that the point was not to establish tent camps. The point was to start a public debate about our future.
Yeah, well, we've done that.
But hold on, let me finish. Let me finish. Before we get...
You took us down a track, with respect, you took me down a track that I didn't want to go down by comparing, the police activities against your movement with the Tea Party. It seems to me that's irrelevant. I want you to address the point, which is the Tea Party, when it gets tens and tens of thousands of people out to rallies, when it decides to play within the current political system, has exercised the sort of influence that I simply haven't seen your movement exercise.
Well, first of all, our movement, if you're going to define it as such, in the United States is only a few months old. I mean, we're just getting started. It's not that easy to organize a nationwide movement in 2 months, and it is organizing, self-organizing very, very quickly. It's completely disorganized and so on. Now, I don't know, I think history will tell who's going to have more impact and what's going to work, and what will people actually embrace. Will they embrace the politics of actual real hope, belief in a better society and creating a society based on some kind of fairness? Or they're going to embrace a reactionary approach to life and want to roll back the clock to the slavery years? I mean, those are the two extremes of the Tea Party, basically. So because the Tea Party has become so extremely right that it has become, somewhat problematically connected to the extreme right wing of the American society.
Well, It just seems to me one thing that the Tea Party has done, and maybe done rather successfully if you look at the last congressional elections, is work within the Republican Party. I just wonder whether there are elements within your Occupy movement who want to work, for example, within the trades union movement, or want to work within the Democratic Party to try to achieve what you want to achieve.
This is the thing about this movement. This movement is also the movement of the indignated. We're indignated with the corruption in our institutions, which led to this economic and moral and whatever disaster we're facing. So the thing is, they're not necessarily Democrats, not necessarily Republicans. There's a lot of libertarians in there, and so on. But the point is, this movement actually connects across cultural lines, across certain class lines, and is actually much more uniting at its core than the Tea Party was.
You, in this interview, have already mentioned Tahrir Square as an inspiration, and I know that in your wider sort of social movement, you've worked with organizations in Egypt and in Spain and elsewhere, giving them video cameras and laptops, encouraging them to join a sort of worldwide online television movement to further social protest. I just wonder, when you look at what's happening in Syria, Egypt, Bahrain and elsewhere, whether you actually think to yourself, you know what, the sorts of protests they're launching, the stand they are making, makes what we're doing here in America pale into insignificance.
I think equality is the same everywhere. I mean, I think they have much bigger challenges physically in Egypt because they have a much more militarized situation. Obviously, they have a much bigger challenge in Syria. One thing I'll tell you is that the thing about this new technology of cameras, it creates a situation where it becomes impossible to commit war crimes, or very difficult. Because if the images are getting out, then it becomes very hard to escape culpability. I think what happened with some of the latest dictators to fall recently is a perfect example. And this new technology of people's ability to immediately get out images of what's happening is actually stopping things from becoming really, really bad.
But when you say that you think, frankly, that all these movements are pretty much the same, are you suggesting that the American government at the moment is directly comparable to the old Mubarak regime or the old Gaddafi regime or indeed the Assad regime in Syria?
No, you see, like, that doesn't logically follow. You have to keep in mind, I was a math major, so logic is actually my forte. Just because the movements are similar doesn't mean what the actual governments they're fighting against are identical. I think that what makes the movement similar is they have similar aspirations, they have similar ideals, they want the similar stuff. And they are facing very similar problems in terms of the corruption within their society. You have to keep in mind, when the Egyptian revolution really exploded, when there was significant, very well documented cases of excessive police brutality that was completely unpunished.
Yes, but before we finish, Vlad, here's a thought for you. Naomi Klein, who's a writer, obviously sympathetic to some of the goals that you have, she said that she sees a problem. She sees there are many movements that spring up, many of which she supports, but many of them get washed away because they don't have sufficiently deep roots. Do you believe Occupy has sufficiently deep roots, particularly in the United States?
Yes. First of all, there are significant roots for what I would call do-it-yourself culture, and this culture of creating, of building consensus zone in the United States in a lot of places, and have been growing for years. The more fundamental issue here is that this movement is actually trying to address fundamental issues facing our society right now in a way that makes everyone like an equal participant at the table. And that's not going anywhere. Now that this idea is sort of out of the bag, it's here to stay.
Well, we'll see, and perhaps we can have you back to discuss that. Vlad Teichberg in New York City, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you.